In an earlier video, we studied the importance of accurate timekeeping on the railway for passengers and how UK Greenwich time was standardised across the country, thanks in part to the Great Western Railway. We're going to fly across the pond today to see how the Americans adopted the same principles across their networks. In the earlier years of the railway, reliable watches were expensive and out of reach of the average guard. The railways differed in their approach to timekeeping, much like the UK did back in the day. The Pennsylvania Railroad, for example, purchased and furnished its engineers with their own pocket watches. The watches were under the careful eye of the station master, who assured that all timepieces were in good order, showing the correct time to the second. If there was any damage to the watches, then it was the engineers that paid the price. In the 1840s to 50s, thanks to developments in the horology industry, machines were developed that allowed for watches to be developed with interchangeable parts. This innovation changed the market forever and made the process of watchmaking much easier and cheaper to manufacture. Edward Howard and Aaron Dennington were the first to perfect these machines, and in 1853 the first of these timepieces were being offered to the public. While more affordable than previous timepieces, these new timepieces were still very high quality. The highest quality machined timepieces went straight into the waistcoat pockets of guards and conductors. The standardisation of the internal workings of the pocket watch also meant that the conductors could add an air of individuality and personalisation to their timepieces. As local watchmakers and jewellers received the internal movements, conductors could choose their own watch cases for their first time. So why did the railroads insist on quality timepieces for their railroads? Well, for every good quality timepiece, you can surely find 10 made on the cheap. The best quality timepieces contained precious stones, such as rubies and sapphires. The stones act as bearings which help reduce friction, which allow the metal parts to move and flow freely across them. In the 1870s, 15 jewelled timepieces were the highest quality, but some could take advantage and use common materials such as coloured glass and scam the unsuspecting guard on a basic salary. These scams were not just underhanded, but downright deadly. In 1891, on the Michigan Southern Railway, the fast mail train number 14 was heading east near Kipton. On the same track heading west, the Toledo Express was heading straight towards it. The conductor and engineer had strict orders to turn onto the siding at Kipton Station to allow the fast mail train to pass. At the station before Kipton, the engineer was told that the mail train had left on time, and the engineer had to assure that his passenger train left on time too, so they could complete the manoeuvre into the siding safely. According to the engineer's watch, the express train left exactly on time. The train was braked outside of Kipton as the engineers changed the points, ready to go into the siding. Seconds after it stopped, the mail train was seen going headlong through the station, into the path of the waiting express, and hit the passenger train head-on, killing several crew and several postal clerks. After careful examination of the root cause of the crash was found to be the engineer's pocket watch. It was found to be of poor quality and would stopped for 4 minutes at some point before arriving at the last station, but had restarted again and no one noticed. As a result, the train left 4 minutes late, more than adequate enough time to get the train into the siding. This was just one of a string of accidents where poor timekeeping and poor quality watches were the primary cause of the crash. To attempt to curb the string of poor quality and fake timepieces, railroads introduced inspections for their watches. The Boston and Providence Railroad asked William Boyd and Sons of Boston to examine every timepiece on their railway. Every watch was examined and a certificate was produced citing if the piece was to be trusted or not. If the timepiece was defective, Then the company themselves agreed to foot the bill for the watch to be repaired. Some railroads went further. Watchmaking legend John C. Adams was made the timekeeper for every railroad entering Chicago and made several recommendations on the type of watch suitable, while other railroads would only accept certain models and makes. In 1887, thanks to general time conventions, the rules of timekeeping finally made its way into the Railway Standard Code. Under adopted Rule 16, watches must be examined every 6 months, and each conductor and engineerman must submit a watch certification certificate from a responsible watchmaker before they will be allowed to be in charge of any train. The variation between each watch must not also exceed 30 seconds a week. John C. Adams wasn't just responsible for watch inspections. He wanted to take it further and developed the Adams system of time records. Licenses were to be issued to watch inspectors, and they provided the time via a wire from the railroads. Every conductor and engineer was required to submit their watches for inspection monthly, and a report on the watches was made. At the end of the month, the reports were submitted and discrepancies noted. It wasn't adopted universally, with some companies inspecting watches bi-weekly and others inspecting theirs every 12 to 18 months. In 1891, in response to uniformity, the whole industry was called to create the universal standard for timekeeping. In 1893, the General Railroad Timekeeping Standard Commission produced new guidelines and required all pocket watches to follow a strict set of standards. These standards were high and were set to ensure only the best watches would be used on the rails. At the turn of the century, watch standards continued to evolve and change. By 1920, watches have had a minimum jewel number of 17 and must not have more than 30 seconds of error over the course of a week. Pocket watches must be open-faced and hunting cases were not allowed. Around the time of the Second World War, wristwatches made with pocket watch movements were becoming the norm and were nearly as accurate as a pocket watch. By the late 50s, more and more conductors laid their old pocket watches down and donned the wristwatch. New watches with 25 precious stones were introduced, as was the electric movement. By 1969, the railroad had moved on, and the very last railroad pocket watch was sold by the Hamilton Company before they left the rails for good. So what about today? The use of modern technology, radios, block signalling and computer tracking has lessened the need on the reliance of watches as a safety device, but they are still an essential tool on any railroad. Many railroads still, even today, insist that every crew member must have an accurate standard watch. And even over 100 years later, the watch must not vary from the correct time by more than 30 seconds. The Ball Watch Company, which has been making watches since 1891, still make official railroad watches which can be purchased today. But if you want one, well, they aren't cheap. The average price for one of these babies can set you back around about £2,000 to £3,000. But if you want authenticity, then it's for you. If your budget can't stretch to that, then you can find many original jewelled pocket watches on eBay at around £300 to £500 a piece. The pocket watches are stunning and are a lovely reminder of an age where time was quite literally everything.